Exciting to be here with you all. Where I am in Vermont, it is not yet raining, but I hear in other parts of Vermont it is pouring down rain. We now have about 28 participants, 29. This session is being recorded. And my name is Sarah Waring. I'm at the Vermont Community Foundation. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be facilitating the session today. We're at about 33 participants. I'm going to wait for another 60 seconds and then we will dive right in. This panel discussion today is about reducing economic disparity and advancing opportunity. And so this is where, if I were a flight attendant, I said, if you meant to go to a different panel, now is your chance to jump off and go find the one you'd like to be at. But if you are here with us and flying to Denver, economic disparity and advancing opportunity, then you are in the right place. All right, we are at 40 participants. We're about 2 minutes after the hour, so I'm going to dive in. First, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is one of those peculiarities of the last 18 months, the digital conference. But it's lovely to be in the same digital room with so many of you. My name is Sarah Waring. I'm a Vice President for Grants and Community Investments at the Vermont Community Foundation. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'll be moderating the panel discussion today. Our discussion today is the title of it, Reducing economic disparity and advancing opportunity. And what I'll do here to get us started is to walk you through a little bit of the logistics. First, if you see on your screen, if you open your Zoom box all the way, you will see that there's the option for closed captioning. Now, some of you may have a Zoom version that's older. Hopefully everybody can see the closed captioning. The tech host has enabled this, but if you open your Zoom box all the way, you can either change the font or turn it off if you choose to. It may be in your ... more button at the bottom of your screen, or it may be called out individually. So first is closed captioning. Second is that we are going to save 15 minutes at the end of this panel for questions and answers. Rather than putting those in the chat function, we would like you please to put them in the Q&A function. So you'll see there are two different functions. Q&A allows us to sort through the questions and take a look and keep better track of them. So please go ahead and enter those as we go. I'll be tracking and watching for those, and then we'll save 15 minutes at the end to tackle them. All right, I am going to turn to introducing the session and introducing the issue. As Jenna reminded us, this is one of our issues panels. And this one relates to proposition number 4, or number 4 in the Vermont proposition, that Vermont must reduce economic disparities, address poverty, and promote opportunities for prosperity for all Vermonters. I'll just share a few things. First, it's important to know that a child born in Vermont in the bottom 20% economic bracket has a no better than 1 in 10 chance of advancing to the top 20% during their lifetime. For many Vermonters, getting ahead isn't simply a matter of hard work. It's a question of access. It's a question of access to education, to job opportunities, to healthy and vital communities, to mental health and well-being, and to good physical health as well. The stage for these disparities is often set very early in life. If you don't have access to many of these things, the increasing momentum towards never being able to reach a full potential accelerates very quickly throughout life. For a young person, it's magnified by safe and nurturing environments, communities where children are growing up, and it manifests in an inability to reach a full potential for many of us as Vermonters. I want to just share briefly, today I was picking up my groceries at a curbside pickup, and there was a Vermonter who was needing something in the parking lot of the grocery store. And I got out of my car and chatted with her, and she needed a ride across town. She told me that she was waiting for a hip surgery which I can only imagine because my mom has been through one this year, is quite expensive. She also told me she couldn't do it until she stopped smoking and that she had reduced her smoking by quite a bit, but she wasn't quite done yet. She also couldn't get across town because her groceries were too heavy for her to carry, but she had missed the bus. So as I drove her across town, I was reflecting that I could pick up my groceries and that I had a car and that I could have walked across town if I needed to. And it reminded me about this session and how quickly the things compound to keep us in a place of disparity, whether they are health, family, jobs, transportation, and so on. So with that, I'm going to stop the introduction. I'm going to tell you that a part of the introductions for each of our 4 panelists today is going to be just a visual representation of who they are. To start us off, I am a 40-something white woman. I have brown hair, I'm wearing glasses, and I have an orange shirt on, and I'm in a very boring background with sort of an orange background as well. And Sarah Launderville, why don't you go next?
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Launderville. And just for visual description, I'm a white 40-something woman as well, fat, and have long brown hair, wearing glasses and a pink shirt in front of a printer. Are we going around just doing introductions first?
Why don't you do, yeah, where you, and sort of where you work. Yeah.
Sure. And I'm also the executive director of the Vermont Center for Independent Living. We're a disability justice organization.
Thanks, Sarah. Hal, will you go next?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Halston. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Winooski. I'm African-American, 68 years old, and I'm in my Zoom room. Spent a lot of time here this past legislative session. So I have on my walls some meaningful photos and a map of the world, the Gaul projection. I serve in Winooski as the deputy mayor on the city council, and I'm also a state representative representing Winooski, one of 2 representatives. Thank you.
Thanks, Hal. Sue?
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Sue Minter, and for visual cues, I am a white woman, 60-something, with a bright orange shirt and short hair. And I'm in my Zoom room, which is sort of a room that's transformed many times throughout the many decades we've lived in this house. And I'm happy to be here in my home, safe. I am the executive director of Capstone Community Action, and we'll describe more about what we do, but we are an anti-poverty organization that really blossomed from the war on poverty of the 1960s. And the war rages on and the battle continues with us. Or we're part of the battle, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. All right, Will.
Hello, everybody. My name is Will Eberly. I am wearing a sort of a checkered shirt with some blue and purple and white in it. I use he, him pronouns. I am a 39-year-old white man who is calling in from a different state with really good internet today. I'm in front of a white backdrop, and I work for the Vermont Agency of Human Services as a field director. And at the Agency of Human Services, we provide many safety net types of programs to help all Vermonters, and happy to talk more about that a little bit later.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everybody. The first question that we really want to hear from each of you on, and this is going to be a bit of a dialogue, so we will just pass the baton around a little bit, is how this element of the Vermont proposition connects to you and your work. So Sue, I'm wondering if you'd kick us off.
Absolutely. Well, I guess it is the center of what Capstone Community Action, which, by the way, is part of a network of community action agencies around the state. We are the Vermont Community Action Partnership. Capstone is working in the center of Vermont. We provide services for the counties of Lamoille, Washington, and Orange. And our work is really about breaking the generational cycle of poverty. It is focused first and foremost on crisis services, helping provide basic needs to people, whether that's food, housing, shelter, transportation, and also to help build ladders out of poverty. Our Head Start program, early education, financial empowerment, and workforce. So we have a range of programs, some of which are publicly funded, and then we benefit from philanthropy to do innovative ways to fill gaps. I will say that we are very active in building and supporting and being a part of collaborations. And I'm going to hand the torch to Will because he helps lead some of the collaborations in his work at the Agency of Human Services. And I think some of that collaborative work is key to our future.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate that. Yeah, this work is absolutely central to the Agency of Human Services and my daily role. We absolutely provide a host of supports for people experiencing things like food insecurity, people needing help accessing emergency shelter and ongoing stable housing supports, help accessing affordable childcare, connecting people to just safety net programs needed for things like, different services a person might need in their home to maintain independence and get medical supports and things of that nature. And economic empowerment is absolutely an aspiration and a goal of many of our programs, particularly within our vocational rehabilitation division and the work we do within creative workforce solutions in partnership with employers and businesses around the state. To Sue's point, the collaborative approach is paramount to success, in this arena. And many of us are involved in collective impact type initiatives. And we're very lucky in Washington County to have Thrive, an accountable community for health that has allowed many of our organizations to really join efforts, deploy the resources we have available in strategic ways, ensure that we're aware of each other's work and efforts, and do everything that we can to ensure that the people that we're working with have the best chance of success. In addition to that, there are just so many collaboratives to be proud of in the region. We've got a really vibrant Hunger Council and a housing continuum of care and a Building Bright Futures Alliance for early childhood work. And most recently, we've begun some additional work around strategic planning for homelessness in the region. So I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to delve deeper into some of those things a little bit down the road, but I think it's a good time to pass on to my friend Sarah Launderville at VCIL.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Launderville. How does this connect to our work? So the Vermont Center for Independent Living, we're a statewide disability justice organization, and we support folks with disabilities, but we're also people with disabilities. So the 100% of our board are folks with disabilities and the majority of our staff as well. So kind of understand what it's like to have this lived experience in Vermont of having a disability, but also trying to help and provide peer support and other supports and services. And it affects our work, when you read through the proposition and you read about poverty rates are higher for folks who have disability. And that's true. We just recently released a report that you can find on our website, but that's true whether you're working or not. And then it's additionally problematic. A national study showed that African Americans with disabilities were twice as likely to experience poverty. So this is a huge issue for us overall. But I think that it also connects with our work because there's incredible opportunity right now. And sort of as we get into the rest of the session, I think that, there's lots of opportunity around drastically changing how we operate within the state to ensure accessibility, inclusivity overall. And I guess I'll stop there for now and turn it over to Hal.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm connected to this work through my work as a state representative. I'm in my second term, and it was actually towards the end of last session a year ago that it became very apparent that we needed to have much more focus on social and racial equity as we propose policies and make sure that folks aren't left behind. we have formed a social equity caucus in the legislature. It's going on 2 years old. And even though I'm only one of 2 African Americans in the House, we have about 75 legislators who are actively involved in the Social Equity Caucus, which is also the same number of people who have joined in from around the state. So we have come to learn that as legislators, we really need to create our own equity lens. So as we go through this work, we're asking the hard questions to make sure that our work, our laws are truly equitable and allow those who are disenfranchised, who suffer the disparities, have opportunities to become part of our Vermont community and to have a voice. I think specifically, I have been pushing through a bill H96, which would develop a task force to develop a truth and reconciliation process. I think ultimately we need to have a serious conversation about the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, the social wealth gap, as it relates to Vermont and Vermonters. And how do we remedy the harms that have been done over the past couple hundred years and begin to think forwardly about addressing those gaps and allowing those who, for whatever reason, are not able to be successful, that social and racial inequity is not the case. So we will continue along this path. We will grow in this work. And I'm proud of some of the bills that we passed through that have really seriously addressed the issue of social and racial equity.
Thanks, Hal. This is Sarah Waring again. I'm going to jump back in. You know, it's really excellent to hear each of you describe your work and describe how this connects to your work. And I'm hearing things like the bridges out of poverty, anti-poverty organizations, economic empowerment, safety nets, collaborative approaches. But then I'm also hearing the disparities amongst how economic and social disparities hit us, who they hit, and how they hit Vermonters. And I'm wondering maybe if we could just double click on that a little bit. I think for many in our audience here, we may have a really good sense of how poverty looks in Vermont. But we also, you know, it's never a bad thing to be reminded who we're talking about and how we hold poverty both culturally, right, socially, but then also how we hold it in terms of our policies or our procedures. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to talk a little bit more about, and maybe Sarah, starting with you, because I really appreciated how you, VCIL is one of the embodiments of not about us without us, right? And I'm wondering if we could start with you in thinking about how you hold the population you work with.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking, this is Sarah, I was thinking about how the proposition talks about sort of all the groups that we're talking about as disproportionately impacted by disparity. And this is like, I'm beginning to think like we're all becoming a little too comfortable with this whole disproportionately impact piece when it's discrimination, it's ableism, it's homophobia, it's racism. Like this is the issue. And our systems aren't setting something that's they are setting something that's disproportional, but it was meant to, right? Like, so it was meant to set up a system where people with disabilities are takers of that system. Or, you know, if we look at the way that people think of folks with disabilities, we're either takers or we're inspiration porn for folks, you know, like we're, you know, oh my God, you're so inspirational because you're able to work. Instead of digging into the fact that we have benefit cliff issues and we have people who can't actually access a business because there's no ramp on the front door or there's no accessible bedroom. And so if we don't start thinking in those ways of actually shifting and drastically changing stuff, then it's not going to change. And, you know, I think the way that I think about it is that in this report that I mentioned earlier, that Vermonters with disabilities can actually help replenish the entire workforce. You know, I saw a statistic that there's a projection between 2010 and 2030 that we're going to lose 25,000 workers. And there are 17,000 available folks with disabilities ready and able to work. And we have problems with them accessing those systems. Healthcare being part of this proposition, where if you're afraid to lose your healthcare benefits by going back to work, then you're going to, you know, stay on benefits instead. So there's lots of issues that are kind of all intertwined around all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
You know, just building upon your question and Sarah's point, who are we talking about, and that disproportional burden? And I think for me, as a former legislator, someone who thought a lot about the issues of poverty, and now being in an organization where the people working for Capstone are very much on the front lines. And I have to say that it's been a tremendous education, because until, you know, you arrive at your office at 8 o'clock in the morning on a bitter, bitter cold day, and you see a line of people who you see everywhere. They're working at the grocery store. They're providing home care services for our elders. Many with children, many single moms, and many elderly people above the age, you know, of 60 or 70, waiting in line outside on a bitterly cold day until we open the doors at 8 o'clock so that they can access food, they can access heat, they can access housing supports. That is actually a Vermont that I hadn't seen before. And yet I went door knocking, and I feel that this issue that I'm learning about systemic racism and how blinded and biased I have been in my long history of caring and working on these issues. So I just want to mention that. And so I think one of the many things that the pandemic has demonstrated to those who are thinking is sort of ripped off the blinder of how close so many Vermonters are to economic crisis. And I'm so pleased that VCRD is taking this moment to say this is a catalytic moment. And, you know, the message has to be, we can't go back. You know, we're talking about, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We're doing so well as a state, getting vaccinated. We want to rip off our masks. Please don't rip off the vision that we have started to see of these disparities. And, you know, I heard on the radio yesterday, wealth inequality is health inequality. So we are only as healthy as the most vulnerable among us, which we actually stood up a system where every homeless person had a safe place to live during a crisis. And I just don't want us to forget, and I want us to take these lessons forward. And I'll just stop there because I'm rambling. Sorry.
I saw Will unmute. Oh, Hal or Will?
No, go ahead, Will.
Thank you, Hal. Appreciate it. Yeah, the proposition, I think in broad brushstrokes, really gets to a lot of the essential elements of what's needed, and I'd like to sort of dig in a little bit deeper. So I'm going to blend sort of personal and professional experience here. So, you know, within the Agency of Human Services now, I work primarily out of a place called the McFarland Building in Barrie. And my experience now would be, you know, walking in there with a suit and a tie and having a card reader and going upstairs and having a nice office with a jade plant and a good view and all those types of things. But the first time that I walked into that McFarland Building, it was because I was trying to get food stamps. And I just moved to Vermont, was, you know, experiencing homelessness, living in my truck, a lot of those types of things. And so I just remember such a disconnect between sort of my current experience and that previous experience. And those two things can never really be unraveled. And so just speaking from a moment of remembering the firsthand experience of what it was like to attempt to access things like a safe place to park my truck to sleep or enough food to sort of get through the week, there were certain seminal experiences that really sort of made it possible to go from that cyclical cycle of, you know, crisis after crisis to stability and support and really advancement in life. And so just sort of highlighting a few of those things that, you know, the system itself that we produce to help people is very well-meaning, but can often be very overwhelming and cold. So, I remember attempting to get, that food stamp card and ultimately go into, 3 or 4 hour-long appointments to sort of end up with like $10 or something one time, right? And so it ended up being a lot of attempts to be helped, followed by really not a lot of actual concrete help. Similarly, I remember applying for state health insurance at the point that I had an apartment, and then having, 2 pieces of correspondence. So one said, "Congratulations, we'd like to welcome you to the Vermont Health Insurance Plan." And the other piece of mail with the same address said, "We're so sorry, you're ineligible for Vermont State Health Insurance." So that to me was just sort of emblematic of, some of the confusion that people end up going through, in the process of attempting to get help. And so now, as the person who is able to unlock those doors and go into the McFarland building and greet other people who are, coming there in real crisis, I can never forget what it was like to try to navigate that system firsthand. And so, just the little things that we're able to do, before you pull out the paperwork, taking that person and walking them to the Keurig machine and making them a cup of coffee and getting to know their name, and just sort of generally getting an opportunity to really experience a moment as sort of 2 fellow humans, has an opportunity to de-escalate the situation, grow some comfort, grow some rapport, and put somebody in a place of really being able to think about, really telling you what's going on with them and getting to the next place. And so I share all of that because, currently we're at this moment of time where we have something like 2,000 households who are living in, hotels, who have been for the majority of the pandemic, experiencing homelessness. And we're really good at doing things like providing emergency shelter, emergency food, a lot of those types of things. And that's critical. But if we really want to create an economy where all Vermonters thrive and people go from cyclical crises to just actually really doing very well, we'll have to be very creative and create opportunities for much more relationship building, ease of accessing services, an enhancement of dignity, a person-centered approach that makes people feel like they're really in the driver's seat, and opportunities for real, educational attainment, economic empowerment, the opportunity to continue to make greater wages and to do things like not just, live in apartments or emergency shelters, but buy homes, gain equity, really move along sort of the socioeconomic ladder in a way that empowers a person and gets them off of that merry-go-round of cyclical crisis. So just wanted to make a few of those points before moving on. Thank you so much. And Hal, all you.
Thank you, Will. Yes, I'd like to just build off of what's been shared by Sarah, Sue, and Will. I think what we've learned in the legislative process during this pandemic is that we've been able to really exponentially increase the access to our process because of Zoom, because of YouTube. And that's a good thing because it's the people's house. But what we've learned, many people have not been able to access our house. So we were very fortunate to have support from Vermont Community Foundation to stand up a Social Equity Caucus work group. And we brought together 14 Vermonters from all over the state who would not normally be able to come to a hearing room or a committee room and to participate. And we just had an amazing process with hearing new voices. And as Sarah shared earlier, not about us without us. And as legislators who participated in that process, the blinders were lifted off our eyes. And we now know going forward that we need to continue this access that we've created. So I know as we plan for getting back in person, we know that we have to upgrade our audiovisual technology and to make sure in all of the physical spaces in the State House that there will be access through that medium so that we can continue to hear from these new voices and inform us and help us make our best decision-making as we create policy. I also think it's important that we have to, work outside of the box. We have a very prim and proper approach to conducting our legislative process, but I think that needs to be challenged in how we use time as a way of holding off other voices to be in the participating process. So we've learned a lot and we have a lot more to learn, but the better we can bring in those different voices into these conversations, I think the better we'll all be, because we can do our best work once we have clear insight from people with lived experiences of these disparities that we're talking about.
You know, Hal, that's really interesting. I'm remembering what Paul said about Paul Costello when we were listening to him just about an hour ago. He talked about how economic disparity is one of the things ultimately that can erode a civil society and can erode participatory democracy. You know, and he talked about the wealth gap and how it gets bigger and how we then end up with a cultural challenge that puts people in such different places in terms of access to power, you know, not only self-empowerment, but then being able to participate in some of our quote unquote cultural norms, right? Or our power and privilege and policy, some of the things that guide all of us as a society. That is a fascinating topic. I would love to pause there. I do want to remind folks, we've got about 56 participants, which is awesome. I have one question over on the Whova question and answer. I've got 3 on the question and answer here. Just everyone should know that we are tracking those. I've grabbed them. We are going to turn to those at a certain point. I want to keep the dialogue going with the panelists for maybe another 10 minutes, and then we will turn it over and start to answer some of your questions. But I wanna call out that a few of you have mentioned a couple of things: access to and participation in decision-making being one of them, broadening the voices of lived experience at the table being another. But then Sarah, you were talking about things like benefit cliffs, right? And disincentives to being able to take advantage of opportunity. And Will, you were talking about things like person-centered approaches or relationship building. I would love to turn it for a moment or two to some of the actions that are being taken that you all feel like are really inspirational, things that are making a difference, things that are changing the system that holds some of these conditions in place for people. And I am reminded of the piece of work that came out, or at least I became aware of not too many years ago, about the social determinants of health and how mental and physical health so often is determined not necessarily by your genes, right, but by your zip code, where you live. Are you exposed to certain things? You know, what kind of food do you get, right? Especially when you're a growing person, right? So there are all these challenges built up around the support system you might need for your health and well-being. But literally, if you are in a place and without advantages or without opportunities, you are more inclined to end up with a lot of those challenges later in life. So for me, that was one of those narrative shifting sort of pieces of research that made me think differently about how we address poverty. I'm wondering if there are other examples, whether it's cognitive or it's an actual procedure, policy change, that you all want to call out as a part of. And Will, I see you've already gone off mute, so you get to go first.
Thank you so much. You know, just a bright spot to focus on initially is that we have been able, through the course of the pandemic, to be able to provide virtually every single person experiencing homelessness with safe and stable emergency housing and food. And those two achievements are no small thing. In previous years, the way that we sort of pieced together supports for people experiencing homelessness was admirable, but definitely more disjointed. And there were definitely a fair amount of people who ended up just not fitting into categorical eligibility to get either emergency shelter or to be sort of geographically proximal to where food supports were. And so those two shifts, while they certainly have their limitations, and we're obviously on the precipice of losing, you know, some of the federal funding mechanisms that allowed them to be in place, that said, they were, I think, a profound sea change that allowed us to really provide for those foundational social determinants of health, as you say, the food and housing support. And one sort of thing I'll highlight on that before turning it over and ceding the floor is that, to me, represents a moment in time where, for public health, we shifted from sort of managing things like hunger and homelessness, aspiring to do our best, to flipping a switch where we suddenly decided that in fact we had to do that, and we simply must provide everybody with shelter and access to food and an easy way to get to and things of that nature. And it was a beautiful thing. We saw a real strong cohesion in the community, so many volunteers, so many people creating mutual aid groups or being embedded in the incident command systems to really deploy creative resources in new ways. And it was a beautiful thing. And we really overcame the hardest parts of the crisis by doing that. And at the same time, we're now on the precipice of a new shift where things may go back to normal, as it were. And that's a real tragedy that I don't think we can really afford to let happen as a society. I think that we need to maintain that spirit of these are things that we simply must do. And we have to find the will to continue to meet people's needs in holistic ways, in person-centered ways, from all the sectors of the community, really pulling in those non-traditional players, and continuing to treat people with dignity and give them the things that they need to not just survive, but thrive, not because we're aspiring to, but because we believe we simply must. So that's something that I would absolutely hate for us to lose as some of our federal funding shifts. So just a seed to plant to see if we might be able to kind of keep that ethic with us front and center as we move forward to the next phase.
Great. Go ahead, Sue.
Well, because I've been working with Will on just this very work, it's been the center. We stood up an incident command system to get people safely housed, to feed them, to do medical supports. We're now vaccinating, and we're very much at this precipice moment. And you know, it's keeping me up at night because as soon as the emergency order is lifted, the funding for those very programs is gone, and we are trying to think about these systems. And that's what I mean about not going back to a normal. You know, we're trying to get back to normal, but we don't want to go to that normal. We cannot let that be our normal. We've been working on different images of a hub system, a new shelter system. We are thinking literally this morning on the phone with many people about a new food delivery system. So how do we think, and this issue of collective action and whole-centered approach is so key because, you know, it takes a village. You can't just provide housing. You need to provide workforce development. You need to have access broadly defined. You have to have transportation to that. And as we are set up, you know, there are a number of social service organizations like Capstone and others who are sort of the arms of state government and federal government. But we each are in our own sphere. So that work of being a collaborative action network that we're trying to achieve is so key. And it really showed up during and at the beginning of this pandemic. And the question now is, how do we keep and sustain that work and the success and that commitment to the whole? I want to just tell one story because one of our programs is a community kitchen academy. And it really centers, I think, this story on the issue that Will has also raised around dignity and empowerment. And in this program, we're working with an amazing, courageous woman who was homeless, who was having substance misuse challenges, court challenges. And in this program, she's learned kitchen skills. She's received certification, CCV, but really what she's learned is a belief in herself. And you talk about the adverse childhood experiences and the inability to see a future of success, because I've been privileged to grow up with the supports who helped me see that. But if you don't, how do you gain that? And those are the whole centered, human-centered approaches that I think Will was talking about. Right. This woman is employed, housed, getting her children back into her life. I mean, these programs where we have skills and they actually can see a different future are so key. And again, it takes a collective approach and a very broadly centered approach. Thanks.
Awesome. Hal, you want to jump in?
Sure.
Right.
What really gets me excited and inspires me is that the leadership in our General Assembly in both the House and the Senate have made it very clear that it is critical as we go forward that our committee leadership, whether it's the chairs, vice chairs, and other staff, are now embarking on this path of unpacking race, power, and privilege, because it happens in our committees all the time. And if committee leadership is feeling helpless about what to do, that just compounds the problem and the issues. So for me, that's very exciting. And it's just began this past session. We've been in conversation with leadership, the Social Equity Caucus, about this issue. And it's for me, paramount. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And how do we help and support our committee leadership, which is at the nexus of creating policy and bills and laws, that we have the full picture and the full understanding, and even breaking it down to a personal level, understanding, where am I in this story, and how do I unpack it in a way to be able to begin mitigating these disparities that just naturally pop up. So it's really exciting, and the Human Rights Commission has stepped up in leadership, as well as the Office of Racial Equity. So we have our own infrastructure now to begin really unpacking this work and getting to the root understanding of why there is such disparity.
Excellent. Sarah, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna take us in a new direction unless you, all right. I'm gonna try to pull in some of the questions we are now up to like 10, 12 questions. They are awesome. I feel like I might turn to some of these and engage all of you on these with giving ourselves a little bit more time, because some are about scale, some are about changes at the federal level, some are about things like transportation. We also have education questions baked in here a little bit. So very exciting. I'm going to start by posing another example and then seeing if anyone has any reflections. One of our very first questions was about having a for-profit panelist on the mix here. I don't know exactly how the panelists were chosen. I do know that all of you have some really incredible and unique insight. I am trying to get a quick answer from VCRD about their makeup. But I will say that we are also getting some comments about how important the for-profit sector is in being able to be a bright spot. Programs like the Working Bridges program, programs that connect job skills, right? As Sue was saying, one of those bridges out of poverty being about job skilling, but also the wraparound services that might be really critical to somebody who's entering a job, and the expectations that come with that job, and the access points that you need to sort of know culturally. So there are some really excellent bright spots, I would say, in the connection with our for-profit sector. And I want to pivot that now to a question that I'm going to try to wrap the job skilling question into a little bit of the education question. So someone asked, who and where is there a vision for the job skills needed for current openings and jobs of the future? Do we need to develop access to opportunities that have a future, education that results in wage earning? And how is that information disseminated out into Vermont communities? I'm going to call out, and I may even put in the link, the new platform, and I will find it in the meantime. But I do know that there are annual publications about the best bets in terms of career skilling, and then about those training programs that exist across the state of Vermont. So I'll do a little bit of that research offline, but I would love to turn that question to all of you in terms of job skilling and then the connection to education.
I can just jump in with some initial thoughts. So sort of two tracks spring to mind in terms of livable wages and where there's real opportunity. And I think that one thing that we have to really be clear-eyed about in Vermont and nationally is that the trades themselves are really hurting for workers across the board. At the same time that we're having a tremendous housing boom, a huge amount of people with resources moving into the state, purchasing homes, wanting to renovate them, buying property to build homes, etc. We're also simultaneously on the brink of just not having enough people with the skills to build and fix those homes. and, you know, commercial equivalencies. And so having come from the trades personally in my own life, my origin story before becoming a state bureaucrat, I'm here to tell you that there are many people all around Vermont that are desperately looking for people interested in joining the trades and really prepared to pay them strong, livable wages right now without the need for, you know, new, you know, programs or funding sources or anything. I mean, just, you know, harnessing the existing construction companies that are out there and the huge need that's in place right now. And so that's one immediate place that we can continue to build additional bridges. Having done a fair amount of vocational training and sort of working with at-risk youth in the trades and things like that, the real tragedy in my mind was that we had a lot of people who at that particular time, you know, at this point almost a decade ago, were very interested in going into the trades, were really diligent about showing up to the programs and working and learning the skills. And then at the end of that, we ended up not actually having placements for them. And then you have things like people who could frame a whole house, get an entry-level position, you know, wherever they could, Walmart, Best Buy, whatever, and having the wages be half of what they would have been, you know, on a construction site. So, you know, to say that, yes, there is a huge need for people in the trades, but simultaneously, there's a huge need for us to really artfully link where the people are who are interested in that type of work with the types of supports that would need to be able to sustain it. So we've talked about transportation, we've talked about housing, we've talked about mentorship, and there really is a need in many cases to really put many of those pieces in place and help people with transportation, with, you know, with meals, with, you know, childcare, with, you know, just the connection to sort of the soft skills that allow a person to be comfortable, you know, with the expectations of an employer in terms of, you know, what is workplace behavior like? How am I able to get to, you know, the site in an expeditious manner when, you know, the timing of the workday may be different than sort of other experiences I've had in the past? How do we interact with coworkers? A lot of the things that allow a person to maintain that employment once they've started. And so that really requires, you know, a holistic approach that ties together a lot of these different supports with where those jobs are and where the employers are. People mentioned the for-profit sector being critical, and it's true. I think we have much to bring to the table in the nonprofit and government sectors to provide those tertiary supports to ensure that people's needs are met to be able to sustain employment. So I think that's all very critical, and there's huge opportunity there. And then the other track I would sort of highlight is things in the you know, the administration sort of milieu. We have huge workforce issues across our community-based nonprofits, governments, you know, many of these sectors, and that ties directly to educational attainment. And I feel that there is a huge need in our state to continue to build on the excellent work of places like VSAC, you know, and the scholarship programs and things that we've created to expand those and to bring more opportunities for people with, you know, more adversity, maybe less comfort with sort of the academic environment, more sort of, you know, confidence building, loosening restrictions, making eligibility easier, providing additional supports to really get people those scholarships and those, you know, financial support dollars. And again, that connection to those helpful mentors that really allow a person to feel that they have the confidence to approach that with success and not feel like it's a setup. You know, I have kind of looked at this from a few angles. So being the at-risk, you know, youth who attempted to kind of start school as a non-traditional student and seeing how difficult that was, sort of cold turkey, and then now being the teacher who teaches the class for the at-risk students and seeing that many of the students can't really think about that essay at all because they, you know, they're about to lose their apartment because they just simply can't pay the rent, or they'd like to come to class tonight and they did their homework, but they live, you know, 70 miles away and their friend's ride isn't going to work tonight. So, you know, we tell people that there's jobs, we tell people that there's, you know, school opportunities, and there are, but again, it's up to us to really put those pieces together in a holistic way that really both provides, you know, all the supports that are needed, but also that confidence and that example that you can do this. Other people in your circumstances have gotten through this and have succeeded, and it's you know, going to be worth it to go through this gauntlet. So we have real opportunities there. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hal, did you want to jump in? I see you're.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add. I think we have a real opportunity to bring together educators and the business community, because we've got to be talking with each other to better understand what are the skills needed and how do we go about it with our education system. Prior to getting involved with the legislature, I spent 5 years with the Partnership for Change as a director, and we focused on Winooski School District and Burlington School District. And in both districts, they took a pause, brought in a lot of community engagement, and concluded that they needed to rethink how do they best prepare our youth for the future. And each of them landed on these graduate expectations, the soft skills, communication skills, being creative, a problem solver, a team player, collaborator. I mean, these are the skills that are needed in any workplace setting to be successful. But I think it's paramount that educators and business community figure out ways to get to the table together and to fully understand what are the needs and what is possible to provide so that we are best preparing our young people for tomorrow.
Great. Sarah.
This is Sarah. Yeah, I think partially also I agree everything Will and Hal are talking about, and I think we also need to value certain jobs more than we value them, right? So in my world, personal attendants are at an all-time shortage nationwide, and we projected this, right? Like we started shutting down nursing homes because people want to live independently, and we want to focus on how do we support people in their homes, but we're not supporting, this larger workforce that really needs to be supported. And I can't tell you how many work groups I've served on through legislative study committees, those sorts of things over the years to say, why is there a PCA shortage? And I can tell you, we don't pay people well enough. We don't value the work. We don't put in the energy and effort around childcare, healthcare benefits, paid family leave, all of those things. And so I think that we need to start sort of addressing those broader pieces when we're talking about how do we even build those systems overall. And then I also think about that we used to at one point in Vermont in the women's prison build houses. Like we had a program where we built and taught a trade to women. They were able to then find jobs. We even have a great documentary about it in our state. And that went away because the funding went away. But that created opportunity and it created housing for folks with low income, so looking at those programs that worked, figuring out how do we support those overall, and then kind of re-going. And the last thing I'll share is that for folks with disabilities, the whole opportunity around dual enrollment in high school and college, folks with disabilities access that at lower rates than other folks. And so that needs to change. And I know that our systems are working on trying to make that change and that connection, but that just needs to drastically change, I think.
That's a great program. Thanks for calling that out. Sue, I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to pivot because there's a series of really cool questions about housing and prices and affordability and so on.
So we started talking about sort of education and training, and I want to just also mention while we're looking at high level, on the ground, I think there's tremendous work being done with our private sector as partners. The Working Communities Challenge Grant, Capstone's a part of that opportunity in 2 different communities, but it is very much about the kind of education and training, but it's the supports that we need for people to be successful in their jobs. And I will mention the Working Bridges program, which is central to that, and Capstone partners with United Way on some of the kinds of skills and training we need, like financial literacy. And I do want to mention, to Sarah's point, let's not forget all we've done in the past. We've lived through almost 2 decades of economic budget austerity. And right now, we're not. We actually have resources. So let's go back to those programs and let's build forward. The tax credit program has an unbelievable potential if it continues. That is providing tax credits for people with children. Now, many families that we serve don't actually have relationship with banks. They don't understand necessarily about debt and establishing credit. And that's the kind of training that actually helps people get ahead and have financial security. So there's so much education and training that we may not be thinking about in our big picture, but on the ground. And what's wonderful is we're getting into those businesses that are welcoming low-income employees as their workforce for the future. How do we work together to ensure that that employee is successful and can be retained? We heard from one employer, if we can get them to succeed for 1 year, we'll have them for 10. Of course, it's about paid leave and benefits and salary. We didn't even get to talk about the cliff effect, which is important, and I'm glad it's in there, but we can talk about it later. But I think we need to think broadly about education and training, as we are with our Community Kitchen Academy, our weatherization program, and other programs. But it's really connecting the dots. Last thing I want to say, transportation. If you lack transportation, and by the way, transportation isn't just the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. It is, second only to housing, the biggest barrier to trapping people in poverty, a barrier to helping people out of poverty. So we're thinking with our partners about playing that role of connecting those workers who could be successful if they could just get to work. And that's an important gap that we're trying to fill.
That's great. We do have a question on transportation. But before I follow up on that lead, Sue, there was a question in here that is really interesting to me. Someone asks, as job security and retention diminish, I'm wondering how we might provide people with human rights, AKA benefits, without tying them to and funding them through employment. Typically, these types of programs require organization at a federal level, but that may not happen anytime soon. Is there a way to address some of this at a state level? And I'm wondering if anyone has a quick thought on that, because there's a deep question about housing scarcity going on as well. So any quick thoughts about, yeah, go ahead, Sue.
3 words, Medicaid for all.
That was quick. Anybody
Medicaid
else?
is that program.
There we go. A comment. Great. All right. I'm going to pivot. Yeah, go ahead. All right, good. We got some thumbs up. Excellent. I want to just let folks know that I did put in the chat My Future Vermont, which is a new online platform. I also linked to the Vermont's Most Promising Jobs brochure, which the McClure Foundation sets up every year. The Department of Labor helps to get that out, but that is a connection between promising jobs and the skills that you need to get to them and the credentialing programs. I will also say, to follow on from Sue's example, in this last year, one of the things that the McClure Foundation, which is a part of the Vermont Community Foundation, did early on was to provide a graduation gift to all of the folks graduating in 2020 for a free CCV class. I think one of the other elements here that we are seeing more and more in that connection between skills and education is the role of our state colleges, our technical colleges, and our career centers. Our funding mechanisms for those are also and have been flatlined for many years. And it's encouraging to see that those are beginning to really be some of the central partners. And I hope they continue to be going forward. So let me turn to housing and how to keep people sheltered for a moment. There are 2 questions here. One is about affordable housing in rural communities. And the comment is a little bit about out-of-state property owners, housing costs. And then there's a second question here that I think is really indicative of one of those truths that we sort of don't always talk about. Something like 72% of Vermonters are homeowners, which means that when housing costs go up, 72% of us have some passive income, right? Our equity is increasing. So the other question here is about housing scarcity and its growth and its consistent growth in equity and value. It seems that addressing the scarcity and the exclusionary price index, we need individuals to be willing to see their home values decrease. So I would love to just pose that to the panel and see how folks, any reaction sort of about housing scarcity, manufactured crisis, value, but then also how we keep people sheltered. Go ahead, Sue.
I don't want to hog, but I want to say housing, there are opportunities at the federal level right now. We're working one-on-one with the folks in the hotels who are in emergency, experiencing homelessness. Now, this is an advertisement for folks. Maybe it isn't about devaluing our homes. Maybe it's about sharing them. Because right now we've got programs where we can actually help give a grant to homeowners willing to bring a unit online to help these folks get housing. $30,000. There are so few units. That's one of the things we want to think about. I want to just say the cliff effect and the challenge. We right now have housing vouchers. We have funding for support services, all the things we've never been able to afford, but we don't have places to put people. I heard a story this morning about a vet who, this is the cliff. We finally found an apartment for this gentleman so that he can exit the hotel safely. He applied for unemployment. He has a truck that he can't fix. He applied for unemployment and all of a sudden he's ineligible for the housing and the voucher. So that cliff effect, you can't win. So there are just 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you and sorry for talking too much.
That was very valuable. No need to apologize. You read my mind with the rental rehab program there, so thank you so much. The other thing I was going to throw into the mix is that we may want to think very seriously about expanding our perception of the types of units that are needed to get to the economy of scale of how many units we'll need. To that earlier data point of 2,000 or so households experiencing homelessness, getting emergency shelter through the J Hotel program, that's a whole lot of units that we need right now. And while we do have more vouchers than we've had for a very long time, the amount of just standard apartments that exist in the world and or subsidized units that are available is nowhere near in standing with that number in terms of need. And so while we need to sort of concurrently create more units, support more affordable housing developments, encourage, private land and homeowners to make units available in their own property, concurrently, I would say that we also need to expand the types of units, things like single resident occupancies, micro apartments, accessory dwelling units, any of the types of, home sharing, any of the models that we can use to create many more very, very affordable units will be paramount in this endeavor. There are many people who do have income that would sustain a smaller size unit like a single resident occupancy or a micro apartment that would not satisfy the predominant rents of privately held apartments.
Right.
And so if we were able to, carve up those large old homes that are no longer needed to be as big with the size folks that are in them, et cetera, into smaller SRO type things, make shared kitchen and bathrooms and things available. We can then create a threshold of affordability that is within hand for people's current income without the need to bridge to new programs or vouchers or supports, but just to utilize the existing income that people do have. And I want to make the point that that is always something that should be an option. By no means am I saying that we want to sort of pigeonhole people experiencing, homelessness or poverty or vulnerability into, smaller units or things like that. But we do want to make units available that are hyper affordable. And we've also found that there are a great deal of people who actually would relish the opportunity to be in roommate type situations, and have found that's worked very well, even in the short term, in some of the hotel programs where people have friends and neighbors in a way that they haven't before, and to create the opportunity for ongoing camaraderie and support, via some of those home share or roommate type situations is an additional, innovative, very affordable strategy that we should be considering moving forward, because the bottom line is we need so many units that it will be difficult to build them all within the new construction paradigm and the time frame that we need them in.
Thanks, Will. Hal?
Sure, and if I could add, we have some great best practices here in Vermont that are from the nonprofit sector that allows first-time buyers to own homes. And as we all know, home ownership is the gateway to wealth creation. So in order to really address the wealth gap, we have got to be more creative about finding ways through grants or economic support that allows those who are not quite there, but could be able to own their own home. For me, it's one of the social determinants of wealth, housing, and we've got to be more creative to make that happen, because it's the impact that it would have on our whole economy by having more people participating in that world of home ownership and wealth creation.
Thanks, Hal. Sarah?
Sarah, so a couple of things. I would also like to call out some of the nonprofit sector in terms of like the Housing First model that we have, and Vermont Housing Finance Agency, where, you know, I was able to get my first home as a young disabled woman with not a lot of income, and how that shifted my life. But that we also have policies that are keeping people out of housing still, you know, that, you know, people are stuck in jail still because they can't find adequate housing. People with disabilities are stuck in jail. Other folks are stuck in jail because of that. I think of, I hired, right as the pandemic hit, I hired an individual who lives in another state, and she uses a wheelchair and has been looking for an accessible housing unit, has still not found one. So for a full year, has this job that she's working on, and thank goodness we can do that remotely. But the reality is I can't get this new person to come and be in Vermont, who's working in Vermont. And sort of expanding our conversation when we talk about scarcity to accessible, meaning physically accessible housing units for folks who need that, and for folks who will need that. We run a home access program where we're remodifying homes. And if people see this as a broader issue, that at some point you're going to need some accessibility features because disability is a part of human nature, then we're building housing accessible right from the beginning. And then it becomes more integrated. It's not, here's a special building for elders and folks with disabilities. It's all over the place, and we can find places in rural Vermont or wherever else that we want to live.
Great. And Sarah, you've left me with the perfect segue. I'm going to try to wrap a few questions together. We do have only about 7 or 8 more minutes in our time. This is a really robust discussion. It's hard. So I'm going to wrap a couple here. So this is a little bit about rural challenges in different parts of the state. Someone mentioned state colleges, campuses closing, lack of access to various elements. Other people mentioned in rural parts of the state, how you get from one community to another if you don't have the transportation, and how hard that is. And then someone else mentioned how transportation for people with disabilities fits into the proposition, and how we might be able to think about the actual cost for those with disabilities to afford modified and accessible vehicles. So I'm wondering if folks could just expand on, and Sue, you mentioned it, the second biggest cause of poverty in Vermont. So expand on transportation, either some bright spots, things that we know are happening that are going really well or that we hope go really well, or some of the current challenges that we think need to be changed for Vermont in the future.
Well, I can just start by sharing, you know, what I've spent, I'd say 20 years of my career focused on transportation. So I do feel a special obligation to try to tackle what I've learned is you know, we have in Vermont, actually as a rural state, expanded our public transit system on a per capita basis, far more than most rural states. But what I know now is, as important as that work is, and we've, you know, vastly expanded our ridership, et cetera, but it's not, the system of fixed route services is not addressing these problems. So what we are trying to imagine at Capstone with other partners is thinking actually at the intersection of climate and economic disparity. How do we think about developing a shared electric vehicle fleet that is shared like a car share, but is also predominantly focused on being that Uber, you know, that ride hailing, a micro mobility system that is actually prioritizing people who lack transportation, and trying to put those two models together. Because if you are in urban settings now, you don't have to rent a car, you don't have to have a car. And yes, accessible for people with disabilities and all electric. So we're advancing the ball on electrifying our fleet, which we must do. We're utilizing that resource as a shared resource, and we're prioritizing getting people where they need to go, whether it's to work, to healthcare, to childcare, or to food. Those basic needs that people lack and traps them in poverty. So that's the big idea that we're trying to explore, and we're looking forward to advancing, at least on a small scale, and maybe then as a pilot that could go elsewhere.
Great. Hal, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, that's a great thought, Sue. And what I would add to that is as we increase our state fleet with electric vehicles, how do we retire the combustion vehicles in a way to support programs like the Good News Garage, to get people into cars who would normally not get into the car without that kind of support? So once again, how do we think outside the box to address these needs?
All right, Sarah.
Sarah, a couple of thoughts around the colleges closing. I just near and dear to my heart. I graduated from Springfield College, but it was the outpost up in our Northeast Kingdom in St. Johnsbury, and taught there for years. And these really small, great colleges that we have throughout Vermont are so important because we're able to connect with people in our different regions as well as learn with them instead of always connecting online or doing, connecting with broader communities as well. And you can see that sort of eroding away. And so I don't have a good answer around that, but just wanted to acknowledge that. In terms of the questions around people with disabilities and transportation fitting into the proposition, I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is in Japan, in rural Japan, they've done some really great work, and they're starting to do it here in the United States around autonomous vehicles. And there are autonomous buses that fit sort of what Sue was talking about, that go out and you meet your bus and it's accessible and gets you to where you need to be. And they're pretty amazing things that are happening out there that I think is pretty cool. But in terms of the fitting into a proposition, I've advocated very strongly that there be a proposition directly connect disability, or that we need to really make sure that disability is included fully in every single proposition, right? So there has to be a way that we're talking about that inclusiveness, but I do believe that it should be its own proposition, mainly because I'm completely biased around that, but also because if we're going to actually make change, we need to start calling it out, and people need to understand the communities that we live in are just not inclusive to folks with disabilities. And I hope I'm not popping it out.
Thanks,
I know
Sarah.
that there's thunder here and little Will.
A little bit, but you nailed it right at the end. Will, I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to wrap up with, almost we will get booted off at 3:15, like automatically. So Will, and then I'll do a little wrap up.
How exciting. This never happens. Thank you so much. So I see huge opportunity with the nexus of transportation and other forms of support. So on the one hand, yes, help people get into a variety of vehicles that they own, that they have autonomy over. Fabulous. Expand transit options, also fabulous. And at the same time, this concept of like the therapy taxi is something that's really been entrenched in other parts of the world. And imagine a situation where, a person that wanted to get, counseling or peer support or recovery coaching or help with, getting mentorship into getting into school or getting a different, educational or vocational opportunity in place, could get a ride to the grocery store while getting a session of recovery coaching or therapy or peer support, or you name it. And imagine if that could then create some non-conventional billing mechanisms that allow us to use things like Medicaid to pay for a therapy session in ways that we already can, with sort of a byproduct of a unit of transportation where you happen to have gotten to the grocery store while getting that therapy session that we can already pay for. So I think that we can add some of those things in the mix too to better meet our transportation challenges. Thank you so much.
That is an inspirational thought to leave us with. Will, thank you for that. I also just want to thank, we had 21 excellent questions. I'm sorry we didn't have enough time to get to them all. Questions about paradigm shifts, questions about cultural changes, questions about regional disparities. Excellent stuff. I want to thank all of you who threw it in. I was trying to combine them best I could. And those of you who asked questions over on the Whova side, thank you as well. This has been a really wonderful panel. And I think with that, we are about to get booted off. But thanks, everybody. Enjoy your next panelists and take a coffee break.